You should see it. You see it now?
Yes, yes, I do. I'm gonna go
Great.
ahead and mute.
Great. Great. You should. There we are. You see it now? All right. Okay. Let me get started now. Hello, hello, hello to all my friends out there in YouTube land and soon to be on Facebook land and
Yes, yes,
in
I
the
do. I'm gonna go ahead and mute.
in the land of the free. That's okay. In the home of the brave, in the land of anywhere. The land of anywhere. All right. We're just great. Good. Is that me? Is that me? Is that hello, me? Hello, hello to all my friends out there in YouTube land. That was me. All right. Hello, hello, hello to all my friends out there in YouTube land and Facebook Live land and Zoom land and all kinds of lands, Audacity land, the whole 9 yards. It's just so great to have with us today a young man that I had the opportunity to be tutored by while I was at Harvard University. I met Will as I taught, or not as I taught, as I was learning in the historical philosophy of W.E.B. Du Bois class with Dr. Cornell West, and Will was the brilliant teacher associate that was there, the teacher assistant that really just kept us in line. And Dr. West did all that stuff, but Will really did all the work. And so we're just glad to have him. Before I bring him, I want to just introduce my guest my co-host on the show. You all know him. We got this thing where we changed names. He's Pepper. You see that word says Pepper there, and I'm Salt. We're like Salt and Pepper. So I'm Salt, and he's Pepper. And again, I want to introduce my co-host, Elder Jeffrey Healy from the Westminster Presbyterian Church in Tiburon, California. Elder Healy, why don't you say hello to us today?
Hey, hello, Curtis. Hello, Will. What an incredible pleasure and an honor to be on the call with you today, Curtis. You know, we were talking earlier today. We've gone through a year of a cortisol induced world. Everybody's just fearful all the time. I'm glad Will's on. I'm looking forward to having endorphins rushing through the brain again, getting some humor. Will, we're not asking you for any jokes today, but gosh darn it, we're coming out of this thing. Let's be successful. Curtis, back to you.
All right, great. I'm still trying to work this. I got a pushback going on here, man. So I must have YouTube on both. All right. All right. Thank you very, very much. I'm still getting feedback, Helios. So I must be doing something wrong. So look.
Will, do you have your volume on your computer? Not on this, but
Can you hear me?
yes, yeah.
Okay. But I have YouTube on mute.
Okay,
so,
great. That should be good.
Yeah, you shouldn't hear it from there. But it's a pleasure to be with both of you all today. I have to admit, I'm not much of a comedian, so I won't have many jokes for you, although I appreciate that this moment calls for them because, my goodness, we've been dealing with this pandemic for a year now, and we need to see some light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Amen.
All right. Did we do this last week, Jeff?
Yeah, you and I we were going to play a tape, but instead we talked for 45 minutes. It was absolutely beautiful.
All right, look, let's do this, guys. Let's do this. It's 1:07. Let's log out. Okay. Let's start all over.
So you want us to leave and come back?
Because I'm getting like, is that okay, Will?
Sure. And if I need to close my YouTube window, I'm happy to do that. I don't know if that's the source of the problem, but
Let's log out and I'll log back in. Following Curtis's.
Hold on a second. I think I got the problem. I think I'm the problem. I am. There we go. Oh, come back on, Jeff. All right. Can you hear me, Will?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you too.
Okay.
I was the problem.
I don't, you are not, you're never a problem. We
Seriously.
just figure this stuff out as we go along.
Right, right. But man, look, Jeff's gonna come back in. I'm just waiting for him. But again, just appreciate it, man. I guess I was kind of disheveled, man. Got a call from my mother just now about one of my cousins, man. That's in the hospital, that's not doing good, trying to commit suicide or something, bro.
Oh man,
It's
I'm
not
so
good.
sorry to hear that. I'll hold her up in prayer.
Yeah, man, for sure, man, for sure. Okay, Healy, I was the problem. Can you hear me, Jeff?
Yes.
Okay, I was the problem.
Not a problem. Now we're all on. There is no problem.
So good. So I'm gonna edit this, so we're gonna start over again. All right.
Beautiful.
Okay.
And this has got to be funny to guys on YouTube Live. They got to be cracking up. All right. Hello to all my friends out there in YouTube land, Facebook land, Zoom land, Audacity land, archive.org land, the whole land of the free, home of the brave. It's just good to be here today. And I'm so glad we have a special guest on today, someone who's near and dear to my heart. Amen. I always glance at my transcripts just to remind myself that I was actually there at the Harvard University. He was our teacher assistant in the historical philosophy of W.E.B. Du Bois's class that was taught by the venerable Dr. Cornel West there at Harvard University. And so he's William Pruitt. He's going to be here today. But before he gets going, I want to introduce our co-host. I call him Pepper. I am Salt. We're not a rap group, but we rap pretty good. He's an elder at the Westminster Presbyterian Church of Tiburon, California. Say hello to us, Pepper. His name is Jeffrey Healy. How you doing today, man?
Hey, Salt, I'm doing so well. It shouldn't be fair to be doing as good as I'm doing. But, you know, I got to say, when you and I met about 15, 16 years ago, I knew I met my brother, and today I get to meet my cousin. So it's really cool.
That's what's going on. That's what's going on, man. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, I want to introduce our guest today. William Henry Pruitt III is a PhD candidate in the African and American Studies program at Harvard University. His primary field is English, and his secondary field is studies of women, gender, and sexuality. His research explores the dynamics between formal politics on the one hand, and the informal politics of culture, especially art, on the other. While in residence at the Hutchins Center as a Porter and Wesley Fellow, Pruitt will work on his dissertation, which he has tentatively titled A Theory of the Black U.S. Presidency. Ladies and gentlemen, my man, William Pruitt. Will, how you doing today, man?
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation to come and exchange ideas with you all and to talk about a mentor who I absolutely adore and who I'm going to miss.
Wow, that's great. Will, tell us a little bit about yourself. How do you get to where you are right now?
Wow, there's so many different ways to answer that question. I'll try to be brief.
Okay.
I taught 10th and 12th grade English at independent school in New York for 6 years. And then I left that school to enroll at Columbia University and earn a master's degree in comparative literature and English. I then took a year off to kind of figure out what my next move would be. I applied for PhD programs and then wound up at Harvard in the Department of African and African American Studies. So I'm currently a 6th-year PhD student. My goal is to graduate next year in the spring, to defend my dissertation then as well, and then hopefully get a job as a tenure track professor at a research university.
That is great. That is great. I mean, you make it sound so easy. You know, I was at Columbia, and then I just said, oh, we'll see what Harvard has to offer. I put in an application in that. Really, Will? Fantastic.
I'm gonna tell you like my granddad tells me when I tell him he sounds great. I just talk loud.
Okay.
I'm just talking loud. It was not easy. It's still not easy. Writing a dissertation is very challenging, but I'm enjoying the process because I'm very excited about my dissertation topic.
Okay,
Hey, Will,
great. We want to get into that too.
if I could jump in real quick, back in the 90s, there was a guy in New York named David Denby. Denby had attended Columbia. He was talking with his wife about how the Columbia University's program of reading the great books had informed the leaders of the free world, reading all these great thoughts from years past. He went back to Columbia then when he was in his 40s to audit those courses again, to see just how Aristotle sounded as somebody in his 40s, as different as Aristotle had sounded when he was 20. And then he wrote a book called The Great Books that talks about that. Have you reread any books and found that the books changed or you changed?
Oh, I've read so many books that have had that effect on me. I think the first one that really profoundly changed my life was Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, because I resonated so extensively with the narrator's experiences. I couldn't quite appreciate his ironic tone. And ultimately, I sort of take issue with Ralph Ellison's politics. I think in many ways he was more conservative than I am. But to see someone use literary art to illuminate the experience of being Black in a society that doesn't recognize our individuality and our particularity. That was such a profound moment, and frankly, it was one of the reasons why I decided to pursue a PhD focusing primarily on the African American literary tradition.
Beautiful. That's absolutely wonderful. I'm not surprised that Curtis fell hook, line, and sinker for you. He talks about you so nicely. I met Dr. West back in 1995. He came to talk when I lived in St. Louis. He came and spoke to us at our church, and just profoundly had a wonderful impact on me there then. And I've followed him ever since. He came, Raimondo Panicar. I mean, all these just brilliant minds. But the thing that brilliant minds bring is they unsettle others.
Absolutely.
They're a challenge. And we saw what happened with Dr. West. He was a challenge to Harvard.
That's absolutely true. I think that, rigorous thinking should unsettle us, right? It should push us to be our best selves. And, if we aren't unsettled, if we are merely having what we already think affirmed, then I don't think we can really progress. So, in that sense, I absolutely think that Professor West is a model for all of us, right? And he's, no exception to the group of to the desire to grow intellectually. He's brilliant. He's perhaps one of the smartest people I've ever met. But he's constantly reading, he's constantly thinking, he's constantly evolving his own ideas. And, as you aptly point out, he's constantly holding the institutions that he's a part of to account so that they can evolve and progress themselves.
Beautiful. I think I'm going to turn it to Curtis in 1 second. I got to tell you, when I was growing up, grew up in Belleville, Illinois, right across the river from St. Louis. We had been there forever and ever. And my dad was an engineer. And Curtis has heard this too many times, but at dinner, I'm just turned 66. So I was growing up during Vietnam, during all that stuff. And my dad would plink his glass. He maybe had a beer, maybe had lemonade, whatever, but he'd say, switch. And you had to argue whatever we were talking about from another perspective. And he said, Will, unless you know at least 5 perspectives, you can't argue intelligently. Otherwise, as you just said, you just become a derivative of what you last read rather than challenging.
Absolutely. I think people would be surprised to know that on Professor West's Introduction to African American Studies syllabus, he included texts from Thomas Sowell, the famous Black conservative. I recently attended a talk given by Robert Gooding Williams on W.E.B. Du Bois, and he and Professor West have disagreed to some extent on African American political philosophy. So, Professor West himself is deeply engaged and committed to critically engaging the thought, the best, of the tradition among people whom he disagrees with.
Okay, you don't have to take the hook on this one, but what do you and Dr. West disagree on?
That's a great question. I need to think about that a little bit more. I think, okay, so here's a good example. I think Curtis might appreciate this. I don't know if this was disagreement so much, because I think I might have been able to convince him to come around to my side on this. But, The Souls of Black Folk is a phenomenal text, and it's certainly foundational in African American studies, and it's certainly foundational in W.E.B. Du Bois's collection of texts. Du Bois was a very prolific writer. But there's a lot of anti-Blackness in that text, and that's in part because Du Bois is trying to render Black life legible to a white audience. And as a consequence of that, he employs a tone towards Black sharecroppers, towards uneducated Black people, that, might resonate with well-educated middle-class white readers, but that doesn't do justice to the beauty of those Black folks' lives. And so that's, unfortunately, in my opinion, a limitation in the Souls of Black Folk. And so Professor West has a tendency to teach that book, and rightly so, as one of its most, as one of Du Bois's most brilliant texts. But I think, it's also important to acknowledge its limitations, and those limitations are in part born of the goal of the project that Du Bois is trying to complete in that book, and that is to render Black life legible to a hostile audience. I think Black people, the souls of Black folk, are not just a little bit, are much more beautiful than Du Bois is willing to give them credit for being in the Souls of Black Folk. Now, I don't want to be too critical of Du Bois because he's such an important thinker. And certainly by the time he writes Black Reconstruction, his attitude towards poor Black people has changed dramatically. In that book, he ultimately argues that Black people are responsible for all the positive outcomes of the Civil War, from public education to the expansion of voting rights and the preservation of the Union, right, which was not the standard interpretation of the Civil War. So even Du Bois's attitude towards poor Black people changes over the course of his body of work. But the reason I bring it up is because I just remember thinking, the Souls of Black Folk is great, but during those lectures, which Curtis well remembers, I also thought, it would be great to also put it in critical context and talk about how Du Bois's representations of the souls of Black folk do not reflect Black folks' beauty to the extent that it should. And I think ultimately Professor West would agree with me on that.
Wonderful. Well, I went back in I keep writings that I've done for a long time, and my mother was an English teacher, so she really inculcated that into us. I read something the other day and I went, man, I wish I could get a hold of that young kid and tell him a thing or two. Me, what would you tell you of 20 years ago?
Let's see. That's a wonderful question. So 20 years ago, I was 15. I would have been a sophomore in high school. I was attending Gonzaga College High School, which was a Jesuit high school in DC, just a few blocks from the United States Capitol.
Right.
And I thought, frankly, at that time in my life that I had more to learn from experience than I did from books. And so I was not as a serious student, as I would, as I would like to have been, or as I wish that I had been. So I would probably tell that 15-year-old self, it's okay to read. It's okay to just engage other thinkers on the page, and it's also okay to write prolifically and to hone the craft of writing. But I'd also probably tell my 15-year-old self that don't take yourself too seriously. It's okay to have fun, and to try things out and to fail, because you can learn through all of those processes.
Beautiful. So what do you think the 15-year-old you would tell the 35-year-old you?
Oh, wow. I actually just came up with another thing I would tell the 15-year-old me, which is your goal of having, a full-time job and being on the road to retirement at 24 is just completely unrealistic. It's like way too young. What do I think the 15-year-old me would want to tell the 35-year-old me? Um, I think the 15-year-old me would be very proud of me. I don't think he would anticipate that I would be, on this Zoom chat with you all talking about the fact that one of my intellectual role models, is on my dissertation committee at Harvard, and is in regular conversation with me about my ideas.
Wonderful. Well, Will, I can tell you as a 66-year-old, I'm humbled to be on the call with you. So thanks for deigning to share time with us today. Curtis, you're the man. I'm back to you, sir.
I'm letting you get a piece of it, bro. I had Will for a whole semester, so get your dose, man. So Will, you're writing this theory of the Black U.S. presidency. I'm interested to hear this intercontextuality between David Walker and W.E.B. Du Bois. Is that generationally close enough, or is it not close enough? Can we move on that a little bit?
That's a great question. So, not quite the same generation. David Walker publishes his Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World in 1829, and in that text, he is trying to rouse Black people to hold the United States to account. He's revealing the United States hypocrisy. There's a moment in that text when he says, to all of those white people who claim that Black people are okay with their condition in the United States, I ask you not to point to me a Black president, a Black governor, a Black judge. Point to me a Black person who is being tried by a jury of their peers. And the point that he's trying to make there is, that Black people are not treated as citizens in the United States in 1829, when, the vast majority of Black people in the United States are enslaved. And part of the reason why I'm interested in that particular text for my dissertation is because it represents what we would call a Republican test, right? What is the test of the U.S. Of the United States democracy? In Walker's estimation, a Black U.S. president would be the ultimate sign that the United States is living up to the ideals it articulates in its founding documents. And the United States has so far to go towards that goal that it has yet to even try, a Black person, who has allegedly committed a crime by a jury of their peers. And so there's a long history of offering various different versions of that particular test. And I'm very interested in how that test reappears, from 1829 onward, because, of course, many people believed that the election of Barack Obama in 2008 was a reflection of the health of our democracy. That, the election of a president of universally acknowledged Black descent reflected that our democracy could overcome so many of the racial prejudices that have marred this country's reputation. Now, with respect to Du Bois, I don't know many texts in which Du Bois imagined a hypothetical Black U.S. president. He was certainly cognizant of the fact that Abraham Lincoln's detractors often castigated him as a Black U.S. president. But that wasn't necessarily because people believed Abraham Lincoln had Black ancestry. It was because people thought that his politics were too favorable to Black people. And so they denigrated him, using that language. And one of the things I'm interested in is how Obama very much fashions himself after Abraham Lincoln. And how this history of denigrating Abraham Lincoln as a Black person and then claiming him, as a Black person later in history becomes the foundation for thinking about Barack Obama as Abraham Lincoln's surrogate in the 21st century.
That's great. That's great. I'm asking Dr. West right now. I'm just texting him. And I'm saying, hello, Professor. You want to say hello, Will?
Of course.
All right, Will says hello.
So, Curtis, while you're doing that, I was looking up before you came on today. Will, may I call you Will?
Will is fine. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. So I was looking at movies since 1997. Because that's about as far back as we can go when a Black man has been portrayed as a president. Before that, it wasn't even in there. So we had The Fifth Element, Deep Impact, Head of State, Idiocracy, both really, not the ones that you say, hey, yeah, that really shows it. What role what responsibility does the movie industry have? Does the entertainment business have in helping to influence young Black women and men as to their opportunity?
These are great questions. I want to correct the record a little bit. There was a film that starred Sammy Davis Jr. Titled Rufus Jones for President. He is the titular character, and he was 8 years old when that film came out. James Earl Jones starred in a made-for-TV movie called The Man, and the titular character in that movie is the first Black U.S. president. It was based off of and I believe that movie came out in 1970. I want to say 1 or 2. I would need to check. But it's based off of a novel that was published in 1964 by Irving Wallace, also called The Man. So there's actually quite a history of imagining Black U.S. presidents in film. Your question is a great one. One of the things that I'm trying to think about is how the media has tried to set the terms of the first Black U.S. presidency before it happens, right? So when we watch films and television shows that imagine a hypothetical Black U.S. president, how are they conceiving of this figure? What is this figure's political platform? When does this figure become president? How does this figure become president? What is this president's faith, gender? Does this president have children, right? And what kind of country is this figure becoming president of? And so the media has absolutely participated in trying to set those set those terms, and that's something that, frankly, Barack Obama had to account for and deal with when he was running on the campaign. There was this funny there was this funny Onion article. I'm sure you all are familiar with the Onion, the satirical publication, that said, are we really ready to have another Black president after Deep Impact, right? And it was a way of satirizing this tradition of depicting Black presidents as presiding over a world that over the United States, in a world that's undergoing catastrophe, right? And it recognized that during Barack Obama's campaign, unfortunately, he had to contend with these outsized fears of what a Black U.S. presidency would mean for the country and for the world.
Right. Well, first, thanks for bringing me up to speed on those two earlier ones. I didn't know, and another day I learned a lot more. So thank you, Curtis. Back to you, sir.
I think it was 1972. Man, James Earl Jones. Now, Will, interesting thesis. I really want to see how you're going to work this one out. I know that Dr. West, he does not have mixed feelings about President Obama. However, in class, it was clear he had some reservations, right? How are you going to work that out? I mean, it's clear that, President Obama was certainly not, guilty of any political or social malfeasance. However, there was a portion of what he had to do, as we know, when you're looking at an oppressive society, there has to be some dismantling of that society in order to make it create some kind of equilibrium. But he was a bit critical of President Obama when it comes to, what portions of the American Constitution should he take a look at, or should he uphold, or should he dethrone or move, or, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, okay, I'll begin by just reminding everyone I'm speaking on my own behalf. I'm not speaking on Harvard's behalf or Professor West's behalf. Okay. He's a far more eloquent speaker on his own behalf than I could ever imagine to be. And I would say that as we began this conversation, acknowledging it's important to speak the truth, and to use our intellect to understand the way that power works. Mm-hmm. So I would not, at least in my conversations with Professor West, he hasn't been unduly critical of any president. He thinks about what presidential policies are, and he makes assessments of them, acknowledging, the things that people in those offices, that presidents face. So I think, as one of the most outspoken critics of white supremacy and anti-Blackness, I think, Professor West has a profound appreciation for what the first Black U.S. president was up against. And, as you and I both know, he has plenty of critiques of Donald Trump, of Joe Biden, while he also acknowledges the progress. Just the other day, he was on Democracy Now, touting this $1.9 trillion bill that will offer this country important COVID relief. I can say, one of the tremendous advantages that I've had as his student is that he just knows so much about the history of imagining hypothetical Black US presidents. So, so many of the third party candidates who have run for president, he's met and had conversations with. For instance, many people don't know that the first Black woman to run for president of the United States was Charlene Mitchell. She ran at the top of the Communist Party's ticket in 1968. And Professor West just the other day was telling me about a reading group that he belonged to, where she and he would talk about ideas and assess Benjamin Davis, the famous Harlem congressman and communist. They would assess his work, the ideas that he expressed in his pamphlets. So, that's just immensely useful to me. We would talk about Eldridge Cleaver's bid for the U.S. presidency in 1968. We talk about Shirley Chisholm, of course, and Jesse Jackson. And then, as well, he's familiar with so many people who have studied Black U.S. presidencies. So we've talked about Frederick Harris's work, The Price of the Ticket, which was an analysis of whether or not the Black constituents who voted for Barack Obama received enough return on their political investment in him during his presidency. And this was in the middle of Barack Obama's presidency. I believe The Price of the Ticket was published towards the end of Barack Obama's first term. So I've found Professor West to be an amazing interlocutor when it comes to thinking about what it would mean to have a Black U.S. president.
After the 9/11 impact on the country and the wars that we went into, there is a woman author, Karen Armstrong, and she put out a pretty strong critique of Christianity, because so many Americans were just slamming Islam because of the war and saying this was, Muslims are all evil, they're all warmongers. And Karen said, if I put Christianity under the same test, how does it come out? So I love Dr. West. Curtis and I talk about Paideia all the time and just love that. And it gives me great comfort and satisfaction knowing that, Curtis and I hope that we're planting trees, knowing we're never going to sit under the shade of those trees, by having the discussion to see Dr. West making the hard discussions, not just being cheerleaders. How does that feel? Do you get it? Sometimes just want to be a cheerleader, but you know that you can't.
Well, I would reframe it a little bit and say it's important to be both a cheerleader and a critic. That's how we all grow. I want a more racially just and equal society, which entails celebrating the victories and helping us see how we can be better. And that's the way I view Professor West's legacy, frankly. That's the way I situate myself within his legacy, is to think about how far we've come and how far we have to go.
Hey, Curtis, can you share with Will yours and my thought on that thing called +1?
Yeah. So Jeff is a mathematician. I am not, right? He's an engineer from Naval Academy, right? So he has this thing about, this binary world, but he got bored with that and created a trinary world, which if you take, we're all zeros, right? Here. If you become an advocate, let's say, for social justice in this conversation, he will call that a +1, right? But let's say that you were part of that group that was having that little Easter parade on January the 6th in the U.S. Capitol. You will move, you'll be a negative, you'll be a -1. And so we kind of like, because we're doing some things here in the Bay Area that we're trying to create, a prophetic voice that's going to lend some socioeconomic balance to our community that's here. So I hope I said that the right way, Jeff.
You did it great. Just what really slammed me in the forehead, Will, was reading Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail when he rightfully held the white church accountable for being in that view, in that trinary view, as being a zero. They weren't being anti, but doing nothing was the same as being a -1. You've got to be a +1. You've got to take the stand. You've got to do just being colorblind is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be working towards justice.
That's absolutely right. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the idea of people and institutions being zeros.
Well, let's put it an easier ways for me to explain. You'll get it so fast, but do something as simple as litter in a binary world. If I litter, I'm a 0. If I don't litter, I'm a 1. In a trinary world, if I litter, I'm a -1. If I don't litter, I'm a 0. If I pick up litter, I'm a +1. So the 0 just meaning not doing bad.
Will's going like.
Well, I certainly agree with you that we all have something to contribute to make this world better. I mean, that's absolutely true. And we all have the potential to do harm. And so we need to be conscientious about our choices. And I think, I also agree with you that being neutral is not, it is not, it does not contribute meaningfully to the better world that we all need. So, to the extent that that's what you're communicating, we're in complete agreement. And I think at a moment like this, it can be very easy to feel that there's not much you can do, which makes being neutral appealing, right? If I'm, taking care of my family and meeting all of my responsibilities and, not doing anyone any harm, right? Then, ultimately it's all good, right? But the reality is that the kind of change that we need at this particular moment requires all hands on deck. It requires sacrifices from everybody. It requires courage. It requires a moral compass. And we need to find the language to motivate people to see the value in that and to want to be in the number, as people in the church say, right? I think that's so important.
Was it yesterday or last? There's a fellow that Curtis and I have a call with every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 6 a.m. So it's 9 there, so you could get on the call without any problem at all. But we speak for about 75 minutes. And the other fellow is Phil Dillard, wonderful, wonderful man. And he was talking about being out paddleboarding. And he ran through some kelp. And, he powered through. Way to go, Phil. And then he slowed down because he was a little bit tired because of powering through. And then he started paddling again. Well, his board wasn't holding course. And so he had to do all these little micro changes and just work. He was already tired, but he had to do this. And when he got back to his launch point for his paddling, he realized that the keel had broken off in the kelp. So his moral compass was missing. I mean, that was the analogy was if you don't have the moral compass. It doesn't have to be a huge rudder. Just the littlest thing will help you keep course.
Absolutely. I mean, we absolutely need guidance, right? And not only that, we need to have the courage. Um, we need to have the courage to think morally and to behave morally and to give ourselves the opportunity to grow and to evolve, right? To admit when we didn't get things right and to change. I think that's so important in this particular moment, during, as like cancel culture, right? Um, People's ability to admit when they've done something wrong and to evolve, I think, is so important.
Will, you made me look at David Walker again, and that's why I miss you, man, because that environment, it makes you reopen cans that reopen books that you should be reading all the time. I want to quote something from his book, right? Freedom must be actualized by oppressed people themselves, which requires them to assume an independent methodology to analyze their world in order to change it. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's so important for oppressed people to realize that they have power. It might not come in the most traditional forms, right? Or at least the most apparent forms. Like we expect wealthy people to have power, or politicians, or but I think what David Walker is attempting to achieve in that text, and certainly what uh, he's attempting to remind Black people that despite our condition, in the United States, during slavery, we have power. Um, and of course, we see that that power being exercised in slave insurrections, um, and uh, that is part of the Black radical tradition. It's part of our heritage. It's part of the activism in our heritage, the resistance in our heritage. So, with his words, he's trying to remind Black people that they have power and that they can use that power, um, to create a world in which they're free, to create a world, in which they are not under, under the boot of white supremacists, including slave masters.
Back in.
Hold on a second, Jeff.
Sure. Yes, sir.
The other day, watch this, Will. The other night, Jeff was on a community meeting. He's laughing, right? In Marin County, right? Which is where he lives. And I didn't mean to say it like that, but anyway, you have the Zoom meetings, and you can raise your hand, right? And he changed the color of his hand to brown. Jeff, what happened?
I didn't get called on. Repeatedly, even with notice. The guy said, I didn't see it. I didn't see your hand.
So to me, that resonates, oh, by the way, Dr. Brett said, Dr. West calls you an especially brilliant brother, and he's correct again. I'm listening to what you just said, right? We have power if we recognize power. But what happens when other people just refuse to recognize the power that we have in a dominant culture?
Well, David Walker, I don't think, is talking about representational politics. He's not talking about power that that people voluntarily recognize, right? He's talking about the ability to disrupt um, business as usual. He's talking about the ability to rise up um, against those people who enslave you, for example. We know that enslaved people who could read got access to his appeal. We know that there was some suspicion in that time that some of the slave insurrections that occurred were inspired not only by the Haitian Revolution, but by David Walker's appeal. So um, people, white supremacists recognized, and then white supremacists recognized that Black people had the power to disrupt business as usual, and force pressure on them to create a different world. And that's part of the reason why there was a concerted effort to suppress the circulation of David Walker's appeal. And then, of course, there are plenty of suspicions about the way that David Walker Appeal died prematurely, because he died very young.
Yeah, 34, I believe.
That seems right.
So if I could, there's a couple things come to mind, and Curtis mentioned that I was in the Navy. There's a story of an admiral in charge of a naval district, and the local business people and government were saying, all the Navy does is use our services. They have no positive impact on the community. Sound familiar? And so what he did was this was back when people didn't get paid much at all, and he had the entire Navy force paid in $2 bills, so that when the store owners started counting their money at the end of the day, they saw how many $2 bills were in the till. And they realized, oh my gosh, there is an economic impact to this group. The bus strike after Rosa, showed the real economic impact. Curtis and I are working on forming, I'm in the background, Curtis is doing it, on forming a community bank in East Oakland, giving ownership and equity to those that deserve it. In my view, part of the mindset we need to correct is that it's not a pie we're trying to split, it's a pie we're trying to grow. If it's a pie we're trying to split, then it's a zero-sum game. I have to give up for you to get, rather than it doesn't matter what size I have if it all gets bigger. It's got to be, and it's funny to me in that word in business parlance is the integrative model rather than the distributive model. Little bit funny that it's integrative, huh?
Well, I mean, you were certainly referring to one idea. I mean, there's a long tradition in Black intellectual thought of figuring out how to integrate Black people into a capitalist system. There's a long tradition of imagining Black capitalism as a form of racial uplift, but it's certainly not the only conception, and there are others, right? I mean, there are traditions that identify capitalism as a source of Black people's, as a foundational source of Black people's economic oppression, right? There's a long intellectual history of acknowledging that U.S. wealth is predicated on the backs of enslaved people and their descendants. And then the question becomes whether or not racial justice and equality can be achieved within that a system, that has always relied on Black people's exploitation and commodification. So I think that the idea of investing in Black communities, of increasing the number of Black capitalists has a lot of traction in the dominant discourse and is very popular. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that there are some people who view capitalism as part of the source of the problem for Black people.
I appreciate that a lot, and further will say that it's a complex issue. It's not a simple issue at all. So spot on for your much deeper discourse on that than I offered. Thank you.
I wasn't intending. Listen, I'm sure that you and Curtis have have thought deeply about these issues and have wonderful justifications for the ways that you're trying to bring about racial justice and equality. I just want to put them in context.
No, and thank you. And further, we know that we have our ideas, and we know that we get better by listening to other ideas. So I really appreciate you being part of the conversation. Thank you.
So, Will, we just have just a couple of minutes left. I'm just kind of interested, and I want you to just give us, closing thoughts, what have you. But I'm kind of interested in, because Dr. West, on campus, man, I think no one can say that, just to see him walking across Harvard Yard, right? It's not electrifying, right? How do you think things are gonna change a little bit now that he's accepted this position at Union Theological Seminary in New York?
How do I think things will change at Harvard?
Yeah. I don't think they're gonna. Well, to me, it means a lot. Because that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go there, because I knew he taught there, right? And I was glad that I was able to get in, right? So now he's gone. You know how that class was, man. That was like church, right? It was a special thing, right? So now he's gone, and so what are your thoughts?
Well, one thought is that Professor West was able, by virtue of just who he is and his intellect, to bring together people who otherwise on Harvard's campus would not be in intellectual communion with one another, would not be exchanging ideas with one another. So his historical philosophy of Du Bois course, his Introduction to African American Studies course, had professors, fellows, undergraduates, graduate students, local people who just like to audit classes at Harvard.
Right.
Come. He would invite various different activists who he's met in various other meetings to come and exchange ideas. And so I think, one of the losses at Harvard will be that community, that very diverse intellectual community that he was able to assemble, not merely because of his celebrity, which, obviously was part of it, but also because of his desire to engage people intellectually beyond the academy, right? To put the work that's happening in the academy in conversation with the work that's happening outside of the academy. So I think that's one thing that will be missed, because his classroom, frankly, was the only classroom that I saw that happening at Harvard. I mean, he had people coming from various different schools at Harvard: the design school, the business school, the law school, the divinity school, and of course, hundreds of undergraduates who would take his courses. And then, one of my favorite classes that he would teach was his class on the sorrow songs, and in it he would literally have me play from YouTube songs beginning with Negro spirituals all the way through 21st century R&B music. And he would he would narrate this musical history, which in many ways is an intellectual history, um, in the Black cultural tradition, and he would do it in this just extraordinarily profound way that allowed you to feel the power of the music. You know, sometimes you take a class on music and you know they dissect the song so much that it loses its power. You know, it can't impact you the way that it would otherwise. But he had this remarkable talent for has, I should say, he has this remarkable talent for ushering in the power of music to transform a classroom rather than transforming the music with the classroom. And I think that is something that might also be missed. Although, frankly, you know, I think there are a number of brilliant professors in the music department at Harvard who reveal the power of Black music. But you know, Professor West teaches that course or teaches the Black musical tradition in a course that's not exclusively focused on music. And I think that's a beautiful experience that unfortunately future students at Harvard won't get to have because he won't be offering it.
Great. Jeff?
I just, you know, thank you. I just wanted to ask, I was walking that I walk a lot. I do my own little peripatetic, and was thinking about the lack of civil discourse in Washington, D.C. Two thoughts came to mind. One, and they're from not obscure, they're in Kurt Vonnegut's Harrison Bergeron. I don't know if you ever read that it seems as though, and I'm going to say all, knowing that it's not all, but it seems as though all the Republicans are calling all the Democrats Diana Moonglompers. You know, the lady that ran the Department of Equalization. They want equal outcome. And at the same time, all the Democrats, again, not all, are thinking about the Republicans as being Marcel Marceau's character in Silent Movie. He was the only guy that spoke in that entire movie, and the one word he said was no. So how do we get a discourse? How do we get people to quit caricaturizing and start listening, carrying on dialogues rather than serial monologues? How do we get there? How do we get there? Easy question.
Right. If I knew the answer to that, I would. Well, for one thing, I think it's important for us to develop media literacy. I think it's very important for people to be able to identify credible facts. And I think it's also important for people across the political spectrum to be able to ascertain the ideological underpinnings of the media that they consume. And I think once we do that, I think it'll be a lot easier for us to put our own commitments on the table, right, when we have these conversations. Because I think part of the issue is that people don't even really understand what's motivating, their political stances. And so I think it would be wonderful if we increase media literacy, not just merely to determine, which articles are credible and which ones aren't, but to also ascertain what politics are being espoused by the news media sources across the spectrum, because everything is political. And so I think that would be, and then I also think it's really important for us to all know U.S. history soberly, to acknowledge what has happened, to acknowledge how the past has shaped the present, to acknowledge the ways in which the present shapes our approaches to understanding the past and thinking about the past and using the past, citing the past. I think we need to do that as well. And then I also think we all need to hold each other accountable from an ethical standpoint. So yeah, I think that would help. And I mean, I could also point out that so many of us are in our own political silos, and we experience these echo chambers that affirm what we already think without really challenging us. And so we need to create spaces where people can disagree with one another safely without um, without telling lies. I think that would also be a major step forward.
No, thank you. I think you have to know Howard Zinn's History of America if you're going to read Johnson's History of America.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, listen, man. Thank you so much, for your time, my brother. It was great to reconnect, with you again. I want to let you know that you were one of the specific guys that helped me to relax when I got to Harvard and got on campus, man. I really appreciate it. And it settled me down. And I actually did pretty good. I don't think I'll ever take 4 classes in one semester again if I had to go back there to do something, but that was quite rigorous and very strenuous and nerve-wracking. But again, well, thank you so much, man. Good to see you, and hope to see you sometime soon.
Absolutely my pleasure, Curtis. Thank you for the invitation. And Jeff, it was a pleasure meeting you.
My honor. Thank you, sir.
All right. Take care, Will. Talk to you soon, buddy.
Take care.